So if you've been following my channel up to now, you can probably guess that I'm a fan of both baseball, movies, and most importantly, baseball movies. I've already done a couple videos comparing the baseball scenes in Moneyball to the actual game broadcast, but today we're going to look at the movie as a whole and see what was real and what may have been some Hollywood creative license. Moneyball, Truth or Fiction, coming up after the intro. In the movie, Billy Beane, the GM of the Oakland A's, clearly defines the problem.
The problem we're trying to solve is that there are rich teams and there are poor teams. Then there's 50 feet of crap, and then there's us. It's an unfair game. And now we've been gutted, like organ donors for the rich. Boston's taking our kidneys, Yankees taking our heart, and you guys are sitting around talking the same old good body nonsense like we're selling jeans, like we're looking for Fabio. We got to think differently.
Beane constantly states that they need to change how they do things, but he doesn't know what that change is yet. In a visit to the Cleveland Indians to discuss potential trades, Beane runs across Peter Brand, who pitches him an analytical stats-based strategy to find inefficiencies in the market so these Oakland A's can win.
There is an epidemic failure within the game to understand what is really happening. And this leads people who run Major League Baseball teams to misjudge their players and mismanage their teams. People who run ball clubs, they think in terms of buying players. Your goal shouldn't be to buy players. Your goal should be to buy wins. And in order to buy wins, you need to buy runs. Baseball thinking is medieval. They are asking all the wrong questions.
Beane sees this as the solution, hires Peter Brand, and goes all in for the 2002 season with this strategy. Now, this setting up the problem and solution is essential for a movie to flow and tell an engaging story, but it vastly simplifies and condenses how the A's started using stat-based analytical methods to analyze players. In reality, the A's were using sabermetrics, which is the study of baseball statistics, well before they even hired Billy Beane. It actually started with Sandy Alderson in the early 80s. The book describes Beane entering the A's organization run by Alderson. When Billy came to work inside the A's front office in 1993, he walked into the early stages of a fitful science experiment. By 1995, Alderson had created a new baseball corporate culture around a single baseball statistic, on-base percentage. Scoring runs was, in the new view, less an art or a talent than a process. If you made that process routine, if you got every player doing his part on the production line, you could pay a lot less for runs than the going rate. Alderson was building a system with Marine Corps intolerance for exception to the rules. Sandy produced this long paper about the pros and cons of selective hitting, recalled Ken Kuehl, who was in charge of implementing Alderson's rules. He wanted to really push the kids coming up through the minor leagues. No one had ever heard of on-base percentage, but when you're being called up to the major leagues dependent on your on-base percentage, it gets your attention. So the movie's notion that 2002 was a sudden shift of philosophy for the team vastly simplifies the facts. However, I understand that the life and times of Sandy Alderson probably doesn't fit in the narrative that the movie wants to tell, so I get this simplification. To really drill home this change in philosophy, there's an early scene with the Oakland A's scouts. The scouts' comments really drill home the narrative that there's an old-school style of scouting that is archaic and not the way the A's should go. However, by 2002, the A's had already been years into changing into a more analytical approach, and the scouts would not be making the comments they are. One scout comments about a player's face.
I like Geronimo.
Yes.
Hey, guy's an athlete, big, fast, talented.
Top of my list.
Clean cut, good face.
Yeah, good job.
5 tools guy. Good-looking ball player.
Can he hit?
This does somewhat appear in the book, but not in relation to the 2002 A's scouting room. Instead, it's Billy Beane being scouted as a high schooler by the Mets in 1980. Some of the scouts still believe they could tell by the structure of a young man's face not only his character, but his future in pro ball. They had a phrase they used, the good face. Billy had the good face. There's also the famous line about a player's girlfriend.
Got an ugly girlfriend.
What's that mean?
Ugly girlfriend means no confidence.
Okay.
Yeah, he passes the eye candy test. He's got the looks. He's ready to play the part. He just needs to get some playing time.
I'm just saying, his girlfriend is a 6 at best.
There is a mention of a player's girlfriend, however, it's in a completely different context. I'm not sure he wants to sign. He said he'd like to go to law school. Law school? He's getting pressure from his girlfriend, I think. He's looking for love, it sounds like. Billy doesn't interfere much in the search for bad makeup, and Paul says nothing at all. The meetings, from their point of view, are all about mitigating risk. Contrary to how the movie frames it, the comment about the girlfriend is an absolutely valid concern since it's about whether a drafted player will sign. It has nothing to do with baseball ability. The only question that enters my mind is, where the hell were these scouts when the A's were drafting Kyler Murray? So that last segment I read from the book, there was someone named Paul. This is Paul DePodesta, the person that Peter Brand is based off of. Like in the movie, Paul DePodesta did get his start in baseball operations with the Cleveland Indians. However, unlike the movie, he had already joined the Oakland A's well before the 2002 season. In reality, he came to Oakland as the assistant GM in 1999. In this part of the movie, it goes into the steps of implementing Moneyball. First, they highlight 3 players to acquire: David Justice, Chad Bradford, and Scott Hatteberg. This is 100% faithful to the book. These are the exact offseason acquisitions that the team makes, and the reason they are overlooked, from being old and washed up, throwing funny, and not being able to play defense at all anymore, are 100% real. The only Hollywood scene is really when Billy Beane goes to Scott Hatteberg's house to sign him. Hatteberg discusses this in a recent interview.
Everybody's been wondering, does Billy Beane actually show up at your house and make this pitch to you?
No, gosh. Yeah, that's some hot sauce in the movie. He did call me on Christmas Eve. I remember it felt like he was in my room, but no, I think maybe visiting all free agents would be time consuming, but no, he did not show up at the house. So he calls you and he makes this suggestion. Hey, we're going to look at you at first base. What is your initial reaction? Pure shock. I thought he was crazy. I was trying to find the angle in it. Like, he's just trying to get me over there. I didn't understand. It didn't seem feasible to me. But I at the time was a little desperate. As a catcher, I had blown my elbow up pretty good. I mean, really good. It was an asset that kind of went away. I talked earlier about the one part of my game I felt pretty confident in was my defensive ability. And once that went away, the only thing you have now is that hitting side. So my options were limited catching. It was a lot of backup stuff. And I felt like I could still perform on the hitting if I could get everyday at bats. So this was a glimmer of hope from Billy to get those everyday at bats. He was talking about that, and he was saying I was going to play first base. I thought was, man, that's far fetched. They just had the guy that I would be replacing is Jason Giambi, who just won the MVP. Right, so I'm going to this team supposedly going to play first base. I kind of just took it and I said, let's figure it out later.
You can see, the movie did capture the shock for Hatteberg on being asked to play first, and having Beane show up at his house in person makes for a much more dramatic retelling, but that meeting falls a bit on the fiction side of things. One acquisition they did get the timeline wrong on was the signing of Jeremy Giambi. The movie makes it seem like it was another Billy Beane signing going into the 2002 season, but Giambi had been on the A's since the 2000 season. The movie frames Giambi as a party boy that is trouble in the clubhouse and leads Beane to trade him away partway into the year. This is true as Giambi was arrested in 2001 for possession of a controlled substance in Las Vegas and was traded away from the A's less than 2 months into the 2002 season for John Mabry. Now, if there's something the movie got a bit wrong, it's Art Howe and Billy Beane's involvement in the clubhouse. Early on in the movie, the antagonists are clearly the scouts. They're the one whose mindset is in the past and they aren't embracing the new strategy. However, once the season starts, the scouts aren't there anymore. The movie needs a new antagonist, and Art Howe is who they write into that position. There's some pretty spicy interviews with Howe about his portrayal. Considering the book wasn't real favorable to me to start, I figured it would be something like this, but to be honest with you, it's very disappointing. To know that you had spent 7 years in an organization and gave your heart and soul to it, and helped them go to the postseason your last 3 years there, and win over 100 games your last 2 seasons, and this is the way, evidently, your boss, Beane, feels about you? They never called me to get my slant on the things as far as the movie was concerned, so I mean, it's coming from someone. I don't know who it is, but maybe it is Hollywood to make it sell, I guess. I don't know. It's disappointing. They didn't do their homework as far as the movie was concerned because I was on a 2-year contract through 2003. I had another year after that. My agent always took care of my contract. I never negotiated with Billy, especially not in the hallway of the clubhouse. Never happened. I've spent my whole career trying to build a good reputation and be a good baseball man and someone who people like to play for and all of the above. Then in 2 hours, people who don't know me, and Brad Pitt's a big name, people are going to see his movies. And all these people across the country are going to go in and get this perception of me that's totally unfair and untruthful. Now, with how emotionally charged Howe is, and he rightfully should be defensive based on his portrayal, it's tough to really parse through what's real and what isn't. It's clear in interviews that Howe and Beane clash a bit, but it seems like a lot of that clash is related to Howe's portrayal in the book and in the movie. All indications of Howe's time as a manager was that he was on board with Moneyball and there wasn't major disagreements in strategy. Now, what I can say is absolutely 100% fiction is Billy Beane and Peter Brand coaching players on strategy, breaking news to them about transactions, giving emotional rants or speeches in the clubhouse, etc. It's very clear that that part of the management falls under Art Howe. If a player is traded, the manager is the one to tell the player, not the assistant GM. If a player is sent down, the manager tells them, not the GM. There's clear lines between the clubhouse and the front office, and the movie gets really fuzzy on those lines when in reality the players wouldn't really interact with the GM unless they were signing a contract. That brings up another topic. All the players and other people mentioned in the movie. Is everyone mentioned in the movie real? Are their stories accurate? Let's go rapid fire one by one. First is Carlos Pena. Pena was a rookie first baseman on the 2002 A's that is a point of contention between Beane and Howe in the movie, since Howe continues to start Pena at first over Hatterberg. To change things up, Beane trades Jeremy Giambi and Pena within minutes of each other. In reality, Pena was traded 6 weeks after Giambi and was playing in the minor leagues at the time as the A's had optioned him down over a month before he was traded. Pena is also described as a potential Rookie of the Year and future All-Star. While he didn't win Rookie of the Year, he had a breakout season in 2007 with Tampa Bay. He received MVP votes in both 2007 and 2008 and was an All-Star in 2009. Tampa was his 5th team in the majors as he shuffled between teams and put up pedestrian numbers prior to his breakout. He played until 2014 and had 286 career home runs. Ron Washington was the coach that gave this iconic line.
You don't know how to play first base. Scott?
That's right.
It's not that hard, Scott. Tell him, Wash.
It's incredibly hard.
Hatterberg said that Washington was a major reason he was able to learn how to play first. He was the manager of the Texas Rangers from 2007 to 2014, where he had a winning record, won 2 division titles, and made 2 World Series appearances. He recently won his first World Series ring as the current third base coach of the Atlanta Braves. When Beane informs Howe of the trades, he also mentions he sent 3 players down.
You traded Pena?
Yeah. And Menachino, Hilgis, Tam are all being sent down.
This is infielder Frank Menachino and pitchers Eric Hilgis and Jeff Tam, who were all sent to the minors within 3 weeks of each other in mid-May and early June. So while it didn't happen in one day, it did happen. None of them were star major league players and all bounced around the league for a half decade or so, getting infrequent playing time as utility infielder and middle relievers respectively. Interesting note though, Tam is the pitcher who gave up the dramatic Mike Sweeney home run at the climax of the film. When Beane is coaching some players on strategy in the movie, he is talking to someone he calls Xavi.
And I hate losing Giambi.
This is Eric Chavez, who was a star third baseman for the A's. He played 17 years in the league, won 6 Gold Gloves, 1 Silver Slugger, and received MVP votes in 4 consecutive seasons. He was one of the best position players on the 2002 A's, but this is the only mention of him in the film. This is something we'll get into later. At one point in the movie, Beane passes a person in the clubhouse and calls them by a nickname.
Boos?
That smell's getting worse. I'm on it.
This is Steve Vucinich, the equipment manager for the A's, who was first hired as a sophomore in high school in 1968 and just announced he will retire after spring training next year. That's 54 years employed by the A's. He was such a staple of the clubhouse that the movie briefly including him is a nice little touch. Now the Ricardo Rincon trade scene, where there's a ton of names thrown around. Rincon is a left-handed reliever that is first mentioned at the beginning of the movie when Beane visits the Indians.
So, what are you looking for?
Left-handed reliever. I'm thinking Ricardo Rincon.
That's not gonna happen.
Not even a discussion?
Billy,
even if you could afford him, respectfully. We love him. We're not about to let him go.
Right before the trade deadline, Beane is looking up information on Rincon, setting up that Rincon is the piece they need to make a run. An interesting note, it looks like he's looking up Rincon's stats, but the stats on the screen are actually Chad Bradford's. This scene is pretty close to what is in the book at the trade deadline, where Beane contacts a bunch of other teams trying to wheel and deal, and the final result is the same, the A's get Rincon. But a lot of the names thrown around in the movie are fictitious. First, they call the Indians trying to get Rincon.
Mark, Billy, let's be honest. A premier setup man isn't going to get you any closer to the playoffs.
Are you referring to Rincon?
He's a luxury you can't afford, man.
And you can? There's $500,000 on his contract, and we've got at least one other suitor.
By at least one, you mean one. Who is it?
I'd rather not say.
San Francisco.
Then they call the Giants trying to get them to take one of their relievers so that they no longer are interested in Rincon. They mention Mike Magnante, who we'll get into in a minute, but settle on Mike Venafro, who is a middle reliever that had a pretty average 7-year career for a reliever. Beane tries to negotiate a deal.
Sabester, it's Billy. What do you think of Venafro? I can let you have him for almost nothing.
Why would you do that, Billy?
Because I'm amazing.
Uh-huh.
All I want is a couple of bucks and a sweetener. Throw in, say,
Anderson.
I like Anderson.
Simply saying Anderson doesn't make sense because the Giants had both a Luke Anderson and a Keith Anderson on their Double-A team at the time, so they wouldn't know which one they were talking about. Then they call the Mets to see if they want Venafro. There's a whole bunch of names thrown out.
Steve-O, it's Billy. I hear you're looking for a left-handed reliever. I can give you Venafro. I can make it quick and easy.
What's the angle?
No angle.
Who am I getting fleeced for?
Hang on a sec.
Bennett, maybe?
How old?
26?
26 Double-A? Forget it.
There's no such person as Bennett in the Mets system at the time. The closest is Justin Brunette, who is a 26-year-old AA reliever, so the other details do match.
Duncan, no.
The only Duncan in the Mets minor league at the time was Jeff Duncan, who was a 23-year-old outfielder in A-ball.
No. Furbush, no.
There was nobody named Furbush in the Mets system in 2002. I can't find a name that's close either.
Eckerton?
There's no Eckerton either, but there is a Harold Eckert, who was a 24-year-old pitcher in A-ball. Finally, after getting Rincon, they come to a realization.
I don't want to dampen the mood at all. But since we picked up Rincon,
We gotta send someone down.
They decide to send down Mike Magnante. It's true that the A's optioned Magnante after trading for Rincon. Sadly, Magnante never pitched in the majors again. Interestingly enough, earlier in the movie when they're showing the team struggling, you see a pitcher give up a game-winning home run. This was Mike Magnante's real last pitch in his career. It's inaccurate on the timeline because at this point in the movie they're still in May, but Magnante pitched that last pitch on July 29th. Later in the movie, there's the scene about Jeremy Brown. Him unknowingly hitting a home run is supposed to really capstone the movie and end on a positive note.
it's a metaphor.
I know it's a metaphor.
If you didn't know anything about the book Moneyball, you'd think this was just a random player. However, the book devotes 3 whole pages on Jeremy Brown, and it has absolutely nothing to do with this home run. In fact, his inclusion in the book predated this home run. A big portion of the book covers the 2002 MLB draft, which is completely omitted from the movie. And Beane was extremely high on Jeremy Brown and ended up taking him in the first round. Brand introduces the clip in the movie like Beane would have no idea who Jeremy Brown is. But Beane would have been well aware of who he was at the time. Peter also says this interesting thing.
Jeremy's going to do what he never does. He's going to go for it. He's going to round first, and he's going to go for it.
Which really doesn't make sense because Brown had 14 doubles in only 55 games that season. I'll say it's a very good clip to close the movie out on, and it's also a really cool highlight, but how Brand is narrating it to Beane doesn't make that much sense. Now, finally, the elephant in the room. You can't have any discussion about Moneyball, either the book or the movie, and not mention the glaring omissions of Miguel Tejada, Eric Chavez, Tim Hudson, Mark Mulder, and Barry Zito. Miguel Tejada was the league's MVP that year and was never mentioned in the movie. Barry Zito won the 2002 Cy Young Award and was also never mentioned in the movie. Chavez, Hudson, and Mulder were absolute stars on the team, and they were never discussed in the movie. It's a valid criticism because how the book and the movie portray Beane as a genius and how they're losing their best players going into 2002 although Giambi was an absolute beast at the time. They completely ignore that the team was still really good without Hatteberg, Justice, Bradford, or Rincon. It's really telling when you look at the war leaders on the team. Hatteberg is 7th, and Justice is 12th. If you're in the general audience and see this movie, you think Hatteberg and Justice were the stars of the team. You would have a hard time finding a sports movie where the main characters aren't the stars of the team. If you look at a movie like Major League, the main characters are the main cleanup hitter, the star leadoff hitter, the third baseman that bats third in the lineup, the catcher that bats second, and the ace of the pitching staff. It's completely warranted to criticize Moneyball for not only ignoring their best players, but portraying their 7th and 12th best players as the stars. However, I'm gonna be fair to the movie and book. I had a very smart person once tell me, often it's not how good your best player is that determines team success, but it's how good your 10th best player is. Baseball is a sport where team depth is incredibly important. You have generational players like Mike Trout or Barry Bonds who have never won a World Series or even had that much postseason success, if any. Meanwhile, in 2021, teams like the Rays and Giants, who don't have an MVP or Cy Young candidate, win over 100 games. Even the Braves lost their best player, Ronald Acuna, for the season and found success by creating depth through guys like Jorge Soler or Jock Peterson. In that sense, the Moneyball strategy in the 2002 season absolutely did that. Going into the year, if you had told someone that Hatteberg would be the 3rd best hitter on the team, no one would have believed you. Or if told David Justice would be a league average outfielder after his terrible 2001, you would have gotten some raised eyebrows. The team was able to get cheap, controllable players to patch the holes in their lineup and make the A's a dangerous team from top to bottom. There's going to be some disagreement, obviously, but I still think it's completely valid to both say that omitting the team's best players is ridiculous and does deflate the impact of Moneyball a bit, but it's also completely valid to say that focusing on those other players and acquisitions by the front office makes for a much better movie and did make the team better overall. I don't think anyone would want to see a Hollywood movie of, hey, this team has some really good players, and those really good players played well, and they won a lot of games because of that. In that sense, I do feel the overall decisions made for the script and story absolutely make this a more entertaining movie. Whether it's painting the scouts or the manager as completely out of touch and adversarial to Billy Beane in order to create tension and an obstacle for our protagonist to overcome, or condensing the timeline of trades, signings, demotions, etc. to create more action, these decisions are all to tell an engaging story. And overall, this is a very engaging movie. It was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. It was a success at the box office, and it appealed to both baseball fans and general audiences. Honestly, if a movie brings more attention to baseball and creates more baseball fans, I can't really hate on it too much. If you want a breakdown of the baseball scenes in the movie, check out my video comparing those scenes to the real baseball broadcast. And if you want to support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing.